And so I'll also record the session on my laptop just in case as well.
Okay. Thank you, Justin.
Yep. All right. We are recording.
Excellent. And it's 7 o'clock. So I imagine now that we're live streaming, for those who are online, we just wanted to say hello. We'll give it another moment just to see if there's any others who come streaming in, no pun intended. And welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us so far. These live things are always so interesting. I can't really see who's on the other end, which is usually my preference, but such is the virtual world that we're working in now. It's just nice that you could join us this evening. Hey, Paul, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, at least we have chat. So
chat is beautiful. Please use that. Let us know you're here. Let us know you're listening. We'll go over some of the functionality in a couple of moments, but I will give it another minute. I know it's a fun time of night, probably just wrapping up some dinner. I did as well. I'm hearing my 3-year-old anxiously awaiting his bath. That's the best way to put it. So in the meantime, I'm going to spool up the presentation. And then maybe in just a moment, Justin, I'll pass it over to you after I do a brief welcome again to explain the intent of the meeting and the approach. So as is always the fun point, time to share the screen. Excellent. And I do so love Zoom that much more because I do get to see everybody's faces while I'm presenting, and I do get to see the chat. But on behalf of both the county as well as the consulting team from WSP, we wanted to say thank you so much for joining us here this evening, and welcome to our Public Information Center for the County of Oxford Cycling Master Plan. We're really excited you could join us here tonight. I'm joined by a couple colleagues from both Oxford County as well as my team at WSP. My name is Claire Bashinsky. I'm a senior project manager with WSP, and I'm supporting the county on the consulting side of things. Maybe I'll hand it over to you, Frank, to say hello.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everybody. I'm Frank Gross. I'm the manager of transportation and waste management with Oxford County Public Works.
Wonderful. Jeff, would you like to say hello?
Hi there, everyone. My name is Jeff Exisa. I work for Dillon Consulting, and I'm representing the county on this project, providing a cycling lens on behalf of the county.
Wonderful. Christina?
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Valent. I'm a senior project planner at WSP and helping out with a lot of the technical work and documentation for this plan.
Wonderful. And over to Justin, and I will also move the slide forward so you can ease right into the overview of what we're going to be talking about.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Claire. So my name is Justin Jones. I'm a community engagement planner with WSP, and I'm going to be your kind of, for lack of a better term, I'm your technical host for this evening. So I'm going to be the person who's going to be monitoring the chat, keeping an eye on the question and answer panel, and providing any and all technical assistance as we move through this public input session. So just a couple of housekeeping items. As we've mentioned, and as some of you may know, we are live streaming this presentation through the county's YouTube channel. So through the magic of technology, we are here, we are there, we are everywhere when it comes to this project. So we will be posting this onto the county's website for people to view in the weeks following the presentation, so that if people do have questions, we encourage you to submit them through the Have Your Say Oxford page to give us a little bit more information, and we will respond to any questions that come in either during this live session or in the following 2 weeks after this goes live. So I believe that closes our comment period on March the 12th. I don't know, time has no meaning anymore. So sometime in mid-March-ish is when we will close it. So we are here having this discussion. I encourage all of the folks that are on the Zoom to use the chat functionality. And if you do have a specific question, then I encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I believe that you should have the ability to raise your hand if you are an attendee. If you have a question that you would prefer to ask in terms of a verbal question to seek clarification, please just raise your hand at any point during Claire's conversation. I love interrupting Claire, so we will make sure to, if you need some clarity in the presentation, please use that raise hand feature, and we will get to you shortly. And then, of course, if you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A, and feel free to say hello or leave your comments in the chat function as well as we go through this. We just to give a heads up, I know it usually goes without saying, we have zero tolerance for any abusive speech or any speech that is not kind of in the civil discourse. So we expect folks to be civil in the chat, kind of looking at who's on and who's there in terms of the chat. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think that folks are probably, folks likely know one another. It's, I mean, we know how these communities are, so we don't want you to have to bump into one another down at the grocery store and be embarrassed. So let's try and keep it all civil and happy. And with that, I will turn it over to Claire, who's going to provide us with the presentation and update everyone in terms of where we are at with the Oxford County Cycling Master Plan.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Justin. And I think that last point that Justin made, the update on where we're at, captures what we're trying to achieve here. A lot of work has been done over the past couple of months, almost half a year, and we're really excited to present to you some of the preliminary suggestions that we're putting forward related to cycling infrastructure, programming, policies, and next steps when it comes to Oxford County. So we're using this as an opportunity to give a bit of that project history and an overview of what we've done, as well as focusing on what we're suggesting for consideration to go forward. So as you'll see in the agenda on the left-hand side, we're going to do some refreshers for those who may not have seen this before and those who have, on why we're doing this project and what some of the key considerations and foundations are that we're working with. Then we're going to go over an overview of all the work that we did in phase 1, which was to understand the existing conditions and the foundations of what we're building upon for this cycling master plan. And then we will go into the phase 2 overview, which focuses almost exclusively on the network of cycling infrastructure that we have explored and identified for consideration, as well as the supporting tools and strategies to be able to help facilitate those next steps in the form of implementation and collaboration going forward. Of course, we will have some discussion. I very much dislike talking to people for the entire time, so I will try my best not to do that, and we will focus on the discussion. If anybody has any questions of clarification or would like to ask any questions to the team, And we'll go over some of our next steps and how we plan to move forward and work towards finalizing the plan. So this is really a session to let you know what we've been doing, to present to you some of those preliminary findings, and to give you an opportunity to answer any outstanding questions that you might have, or to let us know your thoughts on what you've heard, what you've seen, and what we're considering in terms of the cycling master plan going forward. So without further ado, just to whet your palate a little bit, if you will, this is really about the foundation of the master plan, which is the County of Oxford's proposed cycling network. Again, proposed. This is what we have identified, and we'll go into its detail in terms of preparation, development, as well as some of the considerations around design a bit later. But this is really that foundation. We are trying to build out and formally establish a continuous and connected network of cycling routes and facilities throughout the county. And all of the strategies, policies, programs, and supports that need to go along with that to make it successful, enjoyable, comfortable, and safe to use. So in terms of the purpose of the cycling master plan, you've already heard quite a few points that I've made that allude to what we're trying to achieve here. And really what this cycling master plan is about is harnessing the excellent work that has already been done by Oxford County and its partners, and building upon that, whether or not it be infrastructure or programming, and building on that to try to bring it almost up to date, if you will. So we're trying to make sure that this plan is aligning with accepted provincial guidelines and standards, that it also reflects the community needs and interests in terms of the directions for cycling. We want to make sure that this isn't just a plan that sits on the shelf. So we want to be able to provide the county and its partners with tools to be able to move forward with implementation, to be able to see this plan through, not 1 year, not 2 years out, but 5, 10 plus years out, hopefully. And that means that it really needs to go beyond, as I said, just that infrastructure, to think even more widely about the different planning, design, and engineering tools that are needed to be able to fulfill the desired vision and directions of the plan, which we'll talk a little bit about later. We have been completing this master plan using a 3-phase process, of which 2 of those 3 phases are the technical work, and the third is really just the documentation. So we have completed the technical work associated with phases 1 and 2 of the project. And so we have those preliminary recommendations that we're bringing here today for consideration. Again, those are very much in flux, I would say, in the sense that they are still being reviewed internally. They are still being reviewed by the team. And so you may see some little differences in information, even in this presentation, compared to maybe some of the information you would have reviewed previously. And that's because we're using this engagement through this session and through other stakeholder engagement and staff engagement to make sure that we're always refining and improving the recommendations as we work towards the final product in the form of the cycling master plan. So we have been doing quite a bit of engagement, as much as we can, responding to obviously the impacts and restrictions associated with COVID-19. And so as part of this project, we have an internal technical advisory committee made up of county staff. We have an external technical advisory committee, which is made up of local municipal staff, as well as other key stakeholders like the health unit, surrounding municipalities, conservation authorities, etc. And so we have tried at key milestones to engage as much as we can with those groups. And we received some really helpful input when it came to our process. And a lot of the input not only complemented each other, but also filled in some gaps in understanding, whether or not that was about opportunities for partnerships and coordination and collaboration related to programming from the XTAC, or more context specific infrastructure improvement constraints or opportunities from an from an INTAC perspective, pardon me. So, we saw some really helpful and great themes that really fed into the different steps and stages of our process, not only from a foundational vision development perspective, but also from a network development perspective, which helped us obviously get to the point where we're at today. Similarly, we hosted an online engagement tool last year, which was made publicly available. And we were pleased to see over 270 responses to that online survey. And that was a great success for us to see the responses there. And the first activity was to get a little bit more information about priorities related to cycling. And this is helpful for us to understand where to place emphasis when it comes to a master plan, where there's interest, where there is need for improvement or direction. And so while this isn't necessarily a work plan for the master plan, it does help us to frame and shape the recommendations that we're putting forward. And so you see here a strong interest around promotion and outreach. And that is not uncommon to other things that we heard with other stakeholder engagement, that there are opportunities for routing, but there is definitely a need to better understand what the opportunities are and to get people excited and interested around those opportunities. So again, that was something that did come out quite strongly. The performance measures really said to us that it was needed to look at how the infrastructure or how the initiatives were performing and monitoring that. So to understand where the successes are happening and where we can improve. And we've definitely tried to explore that through the development of the master plan. The others, including tourism and education, again, complementing quite a bit the promotion and outreach, but definitely building upon some of the great successes locally from a tourism perspective, which we'll talk a little bit about later when we get to the network. So again, these responses have been very helpful to provide a little bit of direction on how to and where to place emphasis within the plan from a strategy and recommendation perspective. This is always, I hate to be biased, but this is always my favorite activity because you really get an actual graphic sense of what the input says. And you'll see that translated even further as we develop the network and as we go through that process. But we asked respondents to identify locations within the county related to 6 different topics. And the first one was barriers. We also asked them to identify destinations, existing routes that were used, improvements that were needed, missing links, and then just other comments. And so you not only get a sense of what the issue is and the number of issues that are occurring, but also the buildup and the location of those issues, which can help to not only identify what some of the improvements could be, but also where the demand is and where the demand may need to be harnessed or enhanced even further. So we saw a lot of great identifications of destinations where people are either cycling to or want to cycle to. So we know that those are great pieces of input to say, are we getting routes to and from those locations? We got a great number of responses about potential improvements, where maybe there would be interest in cycling or experience cycling, but where an improvement would definitely help to encourage more of that use or enhance the overall experience. So we're starting to see through these responses some really great pieces of information to help us better understand where we need to think about getting people to in terms of access and cycling destinations, but also what we may need to do to improve those routes to be able to encourage and make people interested in using those routes and open to using those routes. The third activity was a little bit more general, and this was a set of questions that helped us to create a bit of a profile around current use. And this is just a great opportunity to get a baseline of information. And again, this is not statistically valid, and I would never say that was the case, but it is a good amount of baseline information to be able to understand, where people are cycling, why people are cycling, and what some of the barriers are. And so these questions, or what we have on the slide, is just a bit of an infographic representation of some of those responses. But we're already seeing, in terms of this subjective response rate, though, quite a high use already, which is representative of demand, but also potential. So there's clearly a captive audience of cyclists here in Oxford County who are participating, which is absolutely excellent. But there are also opportunities for us to continually improve, whether or not that's to bridge the barriers or get over the barriers, as we see in the reasons not to cycle, or communicating what the different options are and how to get there and how to use them. So this has been extremely helpful in terms of the information to not only think about the routing, but also think about some of those other complementary aspects of the master plan that can be controlled by the county or its partners to be able to improve the experience of existing users, but more importantly, target new users to get them out on their bikes and using it for day-to-day trips, whether or not that be to get to and from work or their major destinations, or to and from school, hopefully, or to and from an errand that needs to be done. So really great amount of information that we were able to gather, and all of that will not only be part of the documentation and has been part of our entire development process, but is a great baseline to start from in order to learn how hopefully this master plan, once implemented, will start to change some of those habits and start to see the successes realized throughout Oxford County. So now we're going to get into some of the work that we did within phase one. And as I said before, phase one was really meant to provide that foundation of understanding about what we are starting from. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are not starting from scratch. We are starting from an excellent foundation of work that has been done by Oxford County. And that is from not only the infrastructure perspective or the route or the facility perspective, but also from the programming and outreach and just the general experience perspective. And so through phase one, we were able to create the vision and objectives for cycling that are that key foundation of any master plan, what we're working towards, what we're aspiring to create. We undertook a detailed investigation of existing routes to understand what was on the ground now and what the conditions are that we need to build upon. And then, without simplifying things too much, we also went through a very detailed policy review to see where there was support and where there could potentially be improvement, and an analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats based on stakeholder interviews and engagement. And we'll get into some of the findings on the next couple of slides. So in terms of the cycling vision and objectives, a vision, as I mentioned, is the aspiration, is what we are working towards, what we want to achieve through the implementation of the cycling master plan. And objectives are the more detailed descriptions or more specific statements that help to articulate what that vision is. Because of course, a one-sentence statement can't necessarily capture everything. What we found from initial consultation when we started to talk about the vision statement was that it would be really important to make sure that the vision and the objectives aligned with some of the pillars that were already out there, already established from a county perspective. And so we we immersed ourselves in some of the existing documents that that the county has adopted, and we decided to align with the 3 pillars that were previously identified in Future Oxford. And Frank, I hate to put you on the spot, but I think that there's a more up-to-date name for the document, that it's your strat plan, and I don't want to get it wrong.
Sorry, I missed that, Claire.
That's okay. Your strategic plan. I've been referring to it as Future Oxford, but I think I'm wrong. I think you have a newer name that is
well, the community. Sorry, the community sustainability plan is.
That's the one. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Is part of Future Oxford.
Excellent. Thank you. I didn't want to get that wrong, but it had escaped me. But there were the 3 pillars that were associated with those documents in economy, community, and environment. And so we have created cycling statements that align with the objectives as well as the actions that were outlined within those documents or the document, the strategy. And I think it's important to note that this particular plan is very much a result of that document as well as some other policies. And so it already has quite a lot of strength around cycling and the future of cycling. And we wanted to make sure that that alignment was clear. And so you can see that we're really trying to leverage this plan to be able to further the work that's being done in these 3 categories. And the master plan is being shaped around those pillars and around the ultimate objectives that we're hoping to achieve. So with the vision and the objectives in mind, we started to then try to get a better understanding of what's out there from a route and facility perspective. And for those who have heard me present on this before, I apologize, but as you can see on this slide, Oxford County almost has a gluttony of routes to start from, and what a great opportunity here. There are not only locally developed routes and networks like what was outlined in the Trails Master Plan, or the promoted routes that have been identified through Tourism Oxford. But the Cycling Committee has also been very active in identifying potential cycling routes. And there's also a very critical link that has been outlined within the province-wide cycling network within your boundaries. So there is a great foundation of both existing as well as previously identified or adopted routes in other planning policies or planning strategies or through work that others have done. And it really was our job, and we'll get into this in part 2, to work through all of those layers to make sure that we identified the most appropriate routes to form part of the cycling network. This doesn't mean that these go away. The Trails Master Plan is its own document that is meant to complement the Cycling Master Plan, or the Cycling Master Plan is meant to complement that document. And of course, the work that Tourism Oxford is doing is still excellent promotional work that is being very well received by cyclists currently. So this is about focusing on this master plan and building on and refining where we are looking to improve specific routes that make up the network. And in addition to those previously planned routes, I mentioned that we also wanted to get a much better understanding of what's on the ground now. And so we did a very detailed field investigation of the majority, if not all, of county roads. We also worked with county staff to be able to fill in any of the gaps that we weren't able to gather through our field work. And so we have a very robust database of all county roads documenting the current conditions relative to cyclist accommodation and experience. And so you can see that there is a range, and not unexpectedly, that there's a range all the way from, no space or place to accommodate cyclists all the way to bike lanes and urban shoulders. So this was really helpful for us, and you'll see us talking a bit about it later, for us to understand where the potential was, or the greatest potential was, to improve, to accommodate cyclists in a comfortable manner and in a safe manner. And so this is not only a valuable network development tool, which we'll present some more information on later, but is also a great opportunity for some asset management to be able to update continuously as the plan is implemented and as we assess the opportunities for improvement going forward. Justin helped us undertake a number of excellent stakeholder interviews. And so I'd mentioned that we not only wanted to understand what the existing infrastructure looked like, but we needed to understand a little bit more about what the overall experience was around cycling organization, management, experience in general from a usability perspective and governance perspective too. And through those interviews, we created a SWOT analysis, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis for cycling within Oxford County. And I'll say that the opportunities are in the next slide, and there are definitely more of those than there are weaknesses or threats. And threats, we should clarify, are things that we might not be able to anticipate, but could have a considerable impact on the outcomes of the cycling master plan. And maybe not anticipate, but also maybe outside of our control. So in terms of strengths, obviously working with an extremely strong and wonderful foundation of volunteers that are already working on cycling locally within Oxford County. And there's already avenues of communication that can be leveraged and used, which are great opportunities to continue to get information out and to continue to be able to promote. Beyond just the volunteers, there's an extremely strong base of other stakeholders at the local municipal level, within Southwestern Public Health, and other stakeholders to conservation authorities who are leading as well when it comes to cycling. So we have some great opportunity, some great strengths that we can build on for sure. In terms of the weaknesses, there is still a little bit of a lack of understanding or awareness around the opportunities related to cycling within Oxford County. That is definitely growing, especially with the tourism efforts that are happening. But I think that there obviously is quite a bit of opportunity to improve there, and as well as when we expand on the network to be able to educate around what that looks like. You can see in the existing conditions, there are some facilities, but it isn't necessarily continuous and connected at this time. And that's because there hasn't necessarily been a plan like this to be able to help guide what those next steps look like. So that's absolutely one of our objectives, and the key to creating something that is usable for people who are trying to cycle, to create that connectivity and continuity. You also may have seen on one of the previous slides, cycling amenities. And we also know that cycling isn't just about the routes, but it's also about when you get to the end of your trip, how do you store your bike? Do you feel like you need to take a shower or lock something up? Do you need to have effective signage to get you to and from there? So bike parking was something that was identified in the form of an amenity that was a bit of a weakness, the availability of it. And then needing to have some additional support for the current volunteers. And you'll see that also mimics somewhat in the threats category. Both weaknesses and threats, they're good to know about. We need to know about these things in order to develop strategies to be able to address them. So a lot of what you'll see in terms of some of the preliminary actions and recommendations are very much in response to some of those weaknesses, as well as the threats, which we're trying to manage from sort of a threat or risk perspective. But again, more just to know about in order to come up with solutions and measures to address. And of course, the opportunities far outweigh any of the weaknesses and the threats. And there are quite a few opportunities when it comes to cycling, all the way from infrastructure to programming and outreach. And so we absolutely see great potential to build on what is already available, but also to leverage previously planned routes. There are an excellent source, and we'll talk about this later, of funding opportunities that are available at all different levels, as well as tools from a funding perspective internally in terms of the county's paved shoulder policy and other opportunities as well. So there are not only opportunities related to the actual routes themselves and the amenities themselves, but also in the supports to be able to facilitate them. In terms of the strategies, really excellent opportunities associated with focusing on scaling up, as we call it. So looking to take what is already being done locally and bringing that at a wider scale throughout the county. So building on the tourism aspects for more bike-oriented tourism and staycations, expanding that wonderful Recycle Cycles program that's in place, and then also providing toolkits or packages of educational information which could be used throughout the county as well. There definitely are opportunities to bring a more youth-focused lens through the use of existing programs like Cycling into the Future or exploring active and safe routes to school a bit more, and that's embedded into some of the lenses and strategies for routes as well as programming. And then we had to make sure to address the volunteer as well as coordination aspects previously identified on the slide. And so there are definitely some great opportunities to expand internal support, as well as bringing forward some of the local initiatives and partners who are already there in place. So we also talked about the need for policy support and the policy review and considerations. And so there is that extremely strong foundation of policies. The information at the top of the slide outlines the current policies that have some impact or influence on cycling. And I can strongly say that there is already a very strong level of support for cycling within those policies. And so what we've done is we've just identified opportunities for enhancement of those policies at such a time that they come up for review or come up for revision. And so those topics in the center of the slide: active transportation oriented development, health and well-being, climate change, micromobility, and sustainable transportation, those are all enhanced cycling related lenses that when these plans get updated or reviewed, there would be an opportunity to bring in more of those considerations, which would have even more of a complementary impact on cycling going forward, whether or not that's integrated policies that are already in place, wider visioning, or some dedicated specific sections around them. So in the phase 1 report, you'll see where there's some suggestions around how that could be enhanced within the existing policy structure. And we have also developed an education and encouragement strategy, which is based on very much on the information we gathered from the SWOT, but also on some excellent best practices and research that we have available to us. And we really feel that there are 3 extremely strong opportunities for Oxford County. The first, promoting Oxford County as an information hub. So really building the brand and building awareness around Oxford County and providing the information to be able to expand and enhance and further distribute information within all of the area municipalities and to other partners. We want to make sure that we are promoting Oxford County as a leader in infrastructure development, and you'll see that as we talk about the network. And that's not just about the routes, but it's about the complementary amenities, and it's about the design treatments that we are working towards as much as possible, as well as the supports to do that. And in addition to the information as well as the infrastructure, there is also a role where we can see the county as as a leader in trying to develop or a facilitator of new programs. And here, that's where we're looking to adopt some of those new initiatives, but also making sure that we formalize some staff supports to be able to coordinate those programs. So you'll kind of see throughout these slides that it's really about trying to think a little bit more holistically about the impacts on the environment, the economic and community pillars that are in place, and coming up with strategies that complement those and that complement what you'll see in the next couple of slides around the network to enhance the overall experience and the understanding around the network and what we're trying to build out. So maybe I'll just take a quick pulse check. Justin, is there anything in the questions that have come through? I'm not seeing any discussion, but just wanted to check in.
Nope, we haven't had anything come through in terms of chat or questions. But you know, I guess now is as good a time as any to just take a minute and
Yeah.
say, you know, if you do have anything that you'd like to raise, please, you know, feel free to raise your hand or just kind of throw something in the chat and say, I'd like to say something, and I can unmute you, allow you to talk here in the session.
Absolutely. Hands up or Q&A.
And if not, then we can
We'll
always
keep
just
going.
continue
And keep our eyes peeled.
moving
Excellent.
on. Yeah, I am here. So if anything pops into your head, you know, as soon as you put it in the chat, I'll make sure that we take a minute to respond to it.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Oh, as soon as I saw that, I saw a flash coming up. Excellent. What are we seeing?
Just basically, everyone's just really impressed with you, Claire.
Oh, geez. Well, it could all go downhill from here. I doubt it, but thank you. I will take those good comments and and continue this forward. Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So now to I'm sure the piece that you've all been waiting for, the network and how we are going to plan or think about or strategize around getting it implemented. So phase 2 was that focus on the network, looking at a network development process that we work through with county staff and with stakeholders. We'll go through the different steps, but it is an iterative process that we worked through. And that means that we are going back and forth and making sure we're always checking in on the available information and making sure that we're reflecting the objectives and the desired aspirations for what we're working towards. So what we've created through this process is a record of all of the steps in the process, a set of criteria to be able to determine the appropriate routes that make up the network, some preliminary routes that we considered, then the preferred routes, and we have come up with a set of priorities, and we'll talk a bit about that later. And then, of course, we can't, as I said before, just sort of say, go forth and prosper. There are implementation and funding tools that we've identified, which we'll go over at a high level after we present the network. So I'm not a big fan of putting lots of text on the slide, and I don't expect you to read all of this, but we just wanted to put these assumptions out there for everybody's understanding of some of the core fixed aspects of what we felt needed to be brought into the network development process. And so this is a summary of those fixed or assumed aspects so that we all have a bit of a common understanding of some of those foundations of how we will ultimately get to the network or got to the network. So first and foremost, the network focuses solely on county roads. Of course, this is a county plan, but we acknowledge that there are other players. However, it is best practice typically at this level to focus on what you have jurisdiction over. So we are focusing on county roads for the network. The routes that we have selected were selected based on 2 criteria, which we will get into. The first being connectivity and access. And then the second being feasibility. You know, what is it going to take to improve to the level that we need to? And then does this get us to where we need to get to or where people want to get to? So those are two criteria that we applied. We also looked at a system of critical connections that were kind of assumed as part of the network. We wanted to make sure that we were providing access to major communities and employment areas and building on the existing links that are in place now. We wanted to reiterate the province-wide cycling network, which in itself had gone through quite a process of engagement and consultation, and there's opportunities for funding, which we'll talk a little bit about later. We wanted to make sure that we were also complementary to those routes where there were high interest in tourism and community priorities. So the ones that have the high demand now and could be either used currently or enhanced even further. And last but not least, we wanted to look at the routes that were priorities for the community in terms of improvement. So where maybe there isn't current use, but there needed to be something put in order to make the connection or in order to enhance the connectivity or access. We have assumed that the network that we'll be focusing on, which is called the primary cycling network, will be implemented within sort of 10 plus years, 10 to 15 years. So that's the horizon we're working in. And you'll note in those slides that you saw, the slide you saw previously with the network, and when we get into the details, that there are routes beyond the primary network that we've identified, but really the focus is the primary. And anything beyond that is going to be explored maybe if there is demand that's demonstrated and once that primary network has been implemented. So it really is about strategically improving cycling in a meaningful way from a design perspective to connect major communities and major destinations in a spine-like network that traverses the different areas of the county. So with all of that said, let's get into the process. So I talked a little bit about the different steps, but this slide just summarizes all of that up. We need to know where we're starting from, and we talked a little bit about that in the previous slides. We need to look at which routes would logically be good candidates for being part of the network itself, and then confirming what those routes are. And then we needed to explore what the potential improvements could be so that we could come up with priorities and costing associated with it. A master plan is only as effective as the information that's included within it. So we do want to give, as I said before, the county the tools to be able to build the network and build the improvements into different budgets and into the next steps for their work. And so costing and prioritization is a really helpful tool to be able to do that. So these were the steps that we worked through, and we'll go into a bit of the detail of the outcomes of each of those steps and the considerations of those steps before we get into the presentation of the network. So in the previous slide in part one, we had noted that we'd done our significant field investigation to identify the existing conditions within the county. And so this is just a graphic illustration of those existing conditions. So we now have a sense of what is on the ground now, which helps us to start to think about the potential in terms of where improvements could be made at different levels. And so you see there is a range of different conditions throughout the county. As I said before, from no conditions to accommodate all the way to full facilities. And so there is great potential in, I'd like to highlight two of those categories, in the full gravel shoulder, which has quite a bit of space, but gravel on it. And we know some people like to use those routes already, as well as the partial paved and full gravel shoulder. So it's got a lot of the space and some of the paving. So those are two areas where there's quite a bit of potential. And so as you can see, we already through this map have a sense of where those are located, and we can start to think about where the potential could be for some of those routes. We then built from that, and we applied the first step of Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18, which is the leading cycling design guidance within the province of Ontario for municipalities. It was recently updated, and we had the pleasure of working on that guidance document. And so we did have access to the recent version of it. And it outlines a 3-step process, of which the first step is understanding how fast the cars are going and how many cars there are on a particular roadway, to understand what sort of improvement or type of facility or level of separation would be needed. So you see the 3 different categories. On the low end, for roadways with lower volumes and lower speeds, you don't need much to accommodate cyclists, merely just a sign, so a shared facility. The cyclists share the space with other motorized vehicles. As you increase the volume and the speed on the roadway, you need more dedicated and up to separated infrastructure to accommodate cyclists in a comfortable way. Dedicated, for example, being like a bike lane, where there is a specific space that has been designated or dedicated to that cyclist or those cyclists that are using them, and typically has some regulation associated with it through signage. Separated is where there is either a spatial or physical separation that creates a buffer, if you will, between the cyclists and the motorist. Spatial, I mean 2 painted lines. Physical could be anything like a multi-use trail that's offset from the roadway, so you have a huge physical barrier, all the way to a rumble strip in a rural environment. So there's a range of different treatments, and we'll be getting into that a little bit later. But to summarize here, we now have a sense of the roadways, the county roads within Oxford County, and what would be needed in order to accommodate cyclists in a safe and comfortable way based on accepted guidelines. So now that we have that sense of existing conditions and existing need, we needed to think a little bit more about then what are the routes that make the most sense. We can't do everything everywhere. We know that. And so we needed to go through a process to start to refine out routes and start to focus in on specific routes that make up the network. And so we started to apply those 2 criteria that we talked about, first being that feasibility and second being the connectivity and accessibility, to help us focus in on the primary routes that would make up part of the network, the key network for Oxford County, and some of the secondary routes that would be nice to have, but only if the primary network is built out and if the demand is warranted or warrants it, pardon me. So these are just a bit of an overview of some of the assumptions that were built in to the application of those criteria. And we'll show a couple of slides that illustrate how they were applied in a bit more of a graphic sense. The first is that feasibility. And so what we did is we took the information about the existing conditions that you saw, so that's in that first column, and we compared it and overlaid it relative to what the recommended level of separation would be based on Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18. And this gives us a suggested feasibility, if you will, of that particular roadway to accommodate cyclists. This isn't a prescriptive direction on how much it is meant to cost. It's meant to help us think about which routes would be most realistic from the perspective of we have something there now and we need to improve and we want to be the most efficient and effective about it. So I'm going to give you an example. I focused on the full gravel shoulders and the partial paved shoulders and gravel and gravel shoulders. Why is that going away? Weird. Partial paved shoulders and gravel shoulders previously. So you can see in that case, if you wanted to accommodate cyclists on some of those roadways, if you wanted to put in something that was recommended to be a shared or designated facility, it would require a pretty low level of intervention, meaning that you likely would just need to include a sign or maybe add a bit of asphalt. As you get to a more separated facility, in some cases, the space is there and you just need a sign and you just need some new paving, like the partial paved shoulder and gravel shoulder. But when you have a full gravel shoulder, you may need to expand a little bit, or you definitely would need to add some asphalt there, as well as signage. So you see that level of intervention or the need to address to accommodate cyclists heightened a bit there. So now we get a sense in the left-hand side of the slide, you get a sense of just how that relates to all of the roads within Oxford County. And what we've tried to do is focus on those roads where we have the highest potential for intervention at the lowest level of almost financial intervention where we possibly can. So it helps us to get a sense of what that feasibility could look like. We then talked about accessibility and connectivity. And there were a couple of criteria that helped us to quantify that, if you will. And one was starting with the previous routing, and that allowed us to start to think about where routes were currently identified and gave us some of the initial alignment that was starting there. So, you know, again, we're not trying to start from scratch. We're trying to build on what's there. So you see the province-wide cycling network, you see some of the tourism routes, you see some of the trails, master plan routes, as well as the committee routes. And that's where that consideration of county road focus clearly comes into view. A lot of those linkages or networks leverage both local roads as well as county roads. And so we knew from looking at this that we were building on, yes, some excellent existing and previously proposed routes, but that there were some clear gaps within that existing connectivity that was either planned or established. And then we wanted to look at, pardon me, destinations and major nodes. And so what we did is we mapped a 5 kilometer, which is considered a bikeable distance, around built up areas as well as hotspots for major destinations. And so those dots you can see are major and minor destinations, major being day-to-day community destinations like public buildings or major employment nodes, whereas the minor are more recreational in nature. And so you definitely see a buildup in some of the major communities in terms of not only where there is the greatest number of destinations, but also the potential for bikeable distances, and that's the 5 kilometer catchment area. That's not to say that the rest of the communities are meant to be left out, absolutely not. But it does give us a sense of the major points of need or access are, and then some of the other areas where we would want to link in between and throughout. And then the final map on the right-hand side is an illustration of demand. This is actually a graphic that was created based on Strava data. And Strava is a social media-based tool that aggregates information about cycling routes and experiences. And it's subjective, absolutely, but it does give us a sense of the demand or use of current routes and how they're being used, when they're being used, and how frequently. So again, you start to see a bit of that heat map that shows us what links are of interest that are being used, and also where there are some of maybe the missing areas as well. So all of these criteria overlay, and you have to think about, or we had to think about, how they all interplay. Of course, on some of the high demand routes, they're on more local roads and maybe are not as connected as some of the others. And when we look at the feasibility, maybe some of those routes have no existing conditions to accommodate and require a high level of intervention. So it wasn't a 50-50 split. It was being able to look at all of those considerations and work together to come up with the routing, which you see here, which hits on as much of those considerations as possible while balancing the needs and objectives of the plan as well. So as we had mentioned before, the network itself is represented in the form of a hierarchy. And so we focus on the primary cycling network, of which there are about 200 kilometers. And so you see that illustrated in the red. And so that primary network is that major focus area, critical corridors connecting the major urban areas, as well as the settlement areas, and building off of that province-wide cycling network. So this is our focal point. This is our spine. And then the blue lines and the pink lines build out from there. So the secondary network, again, being additional connections that could enhance more of the connectivity within and outside of Oxford County, but only if there is demand that warrants it, and only when we are able to achieve that primary cycling network. And local connecting links are part of the network, but they are on local roads that were included in the province-wide cycling network. So again, we are adopting the province-wide cycling network, but also acknowledging where jurisdiction comes into play. And we have been obviously in consultation with the municipalities and talked to them about these links, and that would be further investigated by those municipalities as part of their own initiatives, or something in partnership with the province and maybe the county going forward. Last but not least, a great opportunity that was brought to our attention, a significant off-road trail from Tillsonburg to Norwich. And it's not that that isn't part of the cycling network, it's just a bit of a separate initiative. Obviously trails, like I said, very much go hand in hand with cycling, but there is a separate approach associated with those. So we wanted to acknowledge it, but that is not formally part of the primary network, but something that would complement it well. One thing that we don't have on this map that we did want to note are the connections to surrounding areas. And that was very much a consideration as part of this process. So you'll see whether or not it's through the east and the west corridors, through the province-wide cycling network, or to the north and the south through existing trail systems and conservation areas. There is access to surrounding areas, and we've consulted the plans that they have in place where possible to be able to leverage those connections and harness the wider connectivity beyond the borders of Oxford County. So those were the routes that we were just going over. And when we think about the routes, the next logical step in at least the guidelines, and definitely within a typical cycling master plan process, is looking at design options. And I did see a couple of flashes coming through when I was talking about the network. So maybe before I get into the design, I'll just plug into you, Justin. Was there anything coming through that people wanted me to address or go back to?
There was just some discussion. Eugene was asking if there was any revision on what we've developed in terms of the impacts of COVID. And I just provide them a response that indicated that most of the work that was done on this project was done during COVID, and really that a lot of the the types of discussions that we're talking about in terms of what prioritizes the, safety and public health measures is exactly what's on this, spatial and physical separation. And so the fact that a lot of the design guidelines, we'll use the term future-ready design guidelines that are coming out, are largely in line with COVID. And so what Eugene had then responded with was just a little bit of wondering if the increase in usage on hiking trails and cycling facilities can be sustained by the development of kind of higher quality routes. And so I responded just letting Eugene know that our team is the one that has developed the new standards in the Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18, and that the new standards that we were using, which are, yet to be confirmed across the province, but they are still the design standards that we are using for this particular project, really do meet that higher standard of safety and separation that is going to provide people that level of comfort as they continue, exploring the county through walking and cycling.
And thank you very much for that discussion and the recap on that, just for others who may not have been able to see it through the Zoom interface, who are on YouTube. So thank you so much for that. It is a really great segue to what we have on this slide, and is something that's kind of unique to this process, which is that in this particular master plan, we are providing suggestions as they align with the guidelines that are provincially accepted, as Justin has mentioned. But we also acknowledge that this is a master plan level, and that design and implementation will definitely be coming next for these routes. And so what we are trying to provide to the county is a set of tools and design directions to help inform the selection of a preferred facility once we move forward with a route. And so you can see on this slide the spectrum, as Justin has mentioned, of facility types that best represent the routes that have been identified as part of the primary cycling network. And if you think back to slide, and I'll probably get it wrong, but I think it's 23 or 24, where we presented that initial step from an Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18 with the level of separation. Just due to the nature of county roads being, upper tier, major spine corridors for sometimes through movement, that you see them fall typically within the category of a designated facility, like a paved shoulder or a bike lane, or a separated facility like the spectrum that you see here, all the way from spatial separation to physical separation. And so you do definitely see a strong correlation between the increase in the level of separation and the overall comfort and safety of cyclists. And so where we can, we are looking to improve to that level, of course, acknowledging the context and the conditions in which we are proposing the improvement be made. And we know that that level of investment, similar to what we talked about through the feasibility assessment, does range, and that as you increase in the level of separation, it is more of an investment. That said, I want to reiterate the fact that we definitely overlaid and took into consideration those existing conditions. So we have tried to leverage where we can the conditions that are already complementary to including or enhancing to a wider or greater level of separation. So we provide this spectrum to educate, to communicate that we are working towards more of a commitment of dedicated and separated infrastructure, and we are providing the county with the resources and the guidelines to be able to support the decision making going forward for the primary cycling network. So as we identify what some of those improvements could be, we then took that primary network and we organized it based on a set of priorities. And so this is not meant to be prescriptive. This is based on a number of dialogues that we've had both with stakeholders as well as internal staff on the different routes and the opportunities relative to the objectives. The intent is for this to be used to help guide some of those next steps in terms of putting projects forward into budgetary processes or pursuing them for implementation. Again, not a firm list, and it is a preliminary take on the priorities. So as you look at this, we would absolutely encourage any feedback on moving something up or moving something down. And we'll go through them in a little bit of detail over the next couple of slides. So in terms of the first improvement, that was the improvements, the 2 corridors, found within the city of Woodstock. And here we see linkages along Devonshire Avenue and Huron Street. The facilities that you see, that what it could look like is not a recommendation. And I'll reiterate that again. It's based on that initial level of separation that was identified previously relative to what's outlined in Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18. And so in these cases, we are looking for more separation, whether or not that's spatial or physical. There are sometimes opportunities to be able to use the boulevard if it's not privately owned land, or if there isn't too much of a moving of utilities to be able to accommodate some of these facilities in Boulevard, or in some cases a reallocation of space to be able to accommodate something within the road right of way or between the curbs, like you see in the buffered bike lane. So again, this is not a recommendation for this here or this here, but just more what the options could possibly look like, and more so stating that we feel like this is probably the top connection that we think should be made in terms of improving the network access, and also based on the input that we received previously. Next up is County Road 119 on Bell Street or Ingersoll Street. And so we know already that there are some existing facilities, at least on Bell Street, but not necessarily on Ingersoll. And so this is an interesting opportunity here where there could be a bit of an interim solution for Bell Street, where some separation could be created as an interim, or left as is, while Ingersoll gets improved to that higher order facility. But again, it's the connection within a major built up area, providing access out and access in. And so there could be some interesting treatments that are put in here, especially on Ingersoll, from possibly an in Boulevard treatment perspective, but again, to be confirmed going forward. In terms of County Road 9, this was actually something that I talked about way back when Frank and I were working on the Trails Master Plan, a critical corridor that was identified to connect the two municipalities or urban centers. And we know that there are already trails that are being implemented parallel, but in terms of providing an option along this corridor directly in between the two communities is definitely of high interest from an access perspective. And here, you can already see in this image some pretty generous shoulders, the opportunity for more of a buffered paved shoulder which could possibly have some rumble strips, could be considered here. We move on to County Road 4, and on this particular facility, the top image, I don't want to draw too much attention to that. The trail in more of a rural setting can sometimes be a bit of a struggle to implement, especially from a land perspective and a utilities perspective and a space perspective. So likely here, we would probably see more of that buffered paved shoulder within that treatment, and also a strong connection point that we're starting to see outside and building out of Woodstock. Then Ingersoll to Thamesford. Here in this particular location, there's a bit of a mix of both an urban and rural experience, which is why you see a range of facilities from a buffered bike lane to a buffered paved shoulder. But as you can start to see, we're now kind of building out from those more urban-based linkages that we originally started from, and expand through the primary network to achieve more of that wider connectivity. The space that is available does look to be able to possibly accommodate a reallocation or just a paving of what's already there. So again, you start to see some of those considerations overlapping of what is currently in place and the intervention to come up with hopefully some solutions that that can be easily achieved going forward. Woodstock to the Great Trail, which some may know previously as the Trans-Canada Trail. I sometimes get tripped up on that, but it's starting to roll off the tongue more so these days. So in terms of that connection, we did emphasize the fact that the Great Trail and other trail facilities existing are very much part of the connectivity of cycling within Oxford County, not part of the primary cycling network, but part of the wider connectivity. And there are some great opportunities to be able to leverage that. So we do want to see this connection coming forward, especially linking Woodstock down to the Great Trail, which not only has the connections within the built up area, but also to surrounding areas around Oxford County. So Tillsonburg to Ingersoll, this is another great example similar to the one that we just spoke about. So again, the linkage bringing us down to the Great Trail, but also the trails within Tillsonburg. And it does leverage those trail connections, but does provide some really beautiful scenic routes that are available that could be easily enhanced through that buffered paved shoulder, or maybe just a paved shoulder treatment as well with some signage and wayfinding. We're almost there through the network, and I am keeping an eye on time, so I know we only have you for 15 more minutes. But second last is the interkip to the county boundary. So some gravel shoulders there, relatively wide, an opportunity for some excellent improvement there. And then last but not least, the township of Zora Loop, which provides some great connectivity as well between existing trails, and definitely was in response to some input that we got from some of the local municipalities about connectivity in the northwest area of the county. We already see some share the road signs, but we know that those are just more information-based signs as opposed to routing signs. So we can build on some of that education that's there right now from a connectivity perspective. But this is definitely a much larger link in terms of distance, and would be something that we would need to explore in a bit more detail going forward. So we can't put all of this information and say we're really excited about considering these as recommendations going forward without having some conversation or acknowledgement of the cost considerations. And I won't dwell on this too long, because I really like to focus more on the, okay, so how do we address that perspective? So we are developing costing, we have developed costing and continue to update that costing, as you'll see here, to reflect different design treatments that are consistent with guidelines, but also reflective of the need for feasible solutions. So we have developed the costing based on accepted unit costs that are updated consistently, and they don't necessarily reflect some of the offsetting that can occur by providing economies of scale with other capital projects or external funding, which we'll talk a bit about on the next slide. But we want to make sure that the information is available and that it is part of the plan to be able to help facilitate some of those next steps. We also have and need to think about costing for other components of the plan, including the education program, including how to maintain and upkeep on the routes. So we've included cost considerations associated with those components as well. Found great success in other jurisdictions of having a dedicated annual fund for programming. And so we would like to see that as an opportunity here, which is what you see on this slide, and making sure that maintenance practices are up to date with the types of facilities that we are suggesting for implementation. So how do we make that happen? How do we fund this wonderfully aspirational document that we want to make into reality? There are a number of different sources, and those are both internal and external. In terms of the internal funding opportunities, there are a range of tools that we do have available. And in these cases, they're already in place right now, whether or not that's through the capital budget, through your paved shoulder policy, or building it into other wider infrastructure projects, or using the operating budget for maintenance. But development charges are also an excellent planning tool to be able to leverage development, to be able to support cycling and other active transportation investments. But there may need to be some changes to the policy to be able to accommodate that. And we are suggesting for consideration that there be the identification of a county and municipal partnership program with some dedicated funds to help support programming, but also infrastructure investment, because this is very much a partnership. We as a county are focusing on the primary network, but we know that there are a number of other local plans and routes that have been developed, and we would like to see the county as a champion to be able to support that and to be able to collaborate with those partners going forward. External funding options, I won't go through all of them, but in short, there are so many more than there used to be, and we have so many great options that we can build upon now. And by adopting this plan going forward, once we confirm the master plan, we will be able to be in a good position to be able to pursue some of those funding opportunities. So those costs that you would have seen earlier in the slides don't even reflect some of these opportunities that we could leverage, because we're not sure what those could look like, but we are encouraging the county to pursue them and to continue to update and understand what is available from an external funding perspective and a private-public partnership perspective. There's also processes that we need to go through. So we know that there's a process to implement the infrastructure, and that's shown on the top of the slide, an adaptation of what's identified in Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18, taking us through, once we have adopted the plan, through to design and construction, and ultimately any policy updates that need to happen. So this is now a bit of an accepted practice when it comes to pursuing the next steps. Once you have a network and a plan, all the way through to getting it built, and there's more direction in that document. But then we also wanted to make sure that we highlighted processes associated with education and encouragement. And that's based on a process and a practice that is known as community-based social marketing. And so these steps reflect a more audience-based approach that is reflected in the education and encouragement strategy that aims to be able to tailor programs and initiatives to the audiences that need them the most, and their preferences and their needs from a communication as well as an engagement perspective. In terms of coordination, the county cannot do this alone, and we know that, and we have looked to a number of other best practices in terms of reporting structures and had conversations about what's working and what isn't. And so this is very much a collaborative approach. There are a number of strategies and initiatives that we have started to consider that would require the efforts of multiple different departments within Oxford County. But even more so to that, outside of Oxford County, there are definitely some critical partners, including the local municipalities that I've already talked about, Southwestern Public Health, as well as other agencies and interest groups. And while we're not prescriptive in saying that this group should specifically lead this particular assignment, there is some recommendation around who could be leading it and who could help to support, and definitely the process to help communicate some of the expectations around roles and responsibilities relative to those initiatives and those strategies. And I believe that this is my last slide before going into the next steps. But of course, we want to understand how this plan hopefully ends up being a success and how we can continually grow and enhance and improve. And so we look to monitoring and coming up with a set of tools and strategies to monitor the success of the plan and to track what has been achieved and to adapt as needed. But we also identify some suggestions of how the programs and initiatives, as well as the infrastructure, can be maintained to a level that is appropriate for the users that are anticipated, as well as learning from those users going forward to understand how that can be improved and enhanced. And that not only goes for the usual months of cycling, but thinking a little bit wider to more year-round cycling opportunities as well. So though this is probably the least amount of time I've spent on a slide, this is probably one of the most important elements of a program, making sure that we're checking in, making sure that we're understanding if it's working, and using this as a flexible blueprint to help guide our next steps and achieve those visions and those objectives that we want to see become a reality in terms of cycling in Oxford County. So in terms of next steps, in just the nick of time, we are going to be summarizing the input that we get from this session, as well as our online engagement that we have been hosting and will continue to host. And as I said, the documentation that's been released, as well as what you've seen today, is going to be adapted and going to be reviewed and revised based on the input that we receive. So it was presented for consideration, and we are going to be continually updating that as we work towards the development of the master plan and ultimately going to council for adoption. So we just really wanted to thank you so much for taking the time today to join us. Like I said, it's not usually my preference to have so many slides, but we really wanted to take a deep dive to explain exactly what we've been working on, how we've gotten here, and the reasons why we have put forward some of the suggested improvements that we have. We hope this was informative. We hope this wasn't too boring, that it was engaging. We hope that the information was exciting. And in the last 4 minutes that we have, I'm happy to take any questions or invite some of my colleagues to make any notes or comments that I might not have hit on throughout the presentation.
So we did have, we had some good conversation. Eugene was mentioning that he wanted to see more awareness of where the trails are and why they're there, and that can help to create more usage and leverage the hopefully the kind of COVID boom that we've seen in terms of active transportation use all over the province. Paul asked if the PowerPoint presentation will be available for reference afterwards. I responded that yes, it will be available on the Speak Up Oxford site. And there was a comment just about from Chris about getting the local municipalities and townships to buy into the networks, because some of the county roads that we've suggested have quieter alternatives that might benefit from infrastructure updates. So that was a good comment as well, in terms of how the primary network potentially interacts with some of the township networks. I do see that Eugene's hand is up.
Yeah, can I respond to that one comment, and then
Absolutely.
I'll keep it really short so Eugene and others can ask their questions. So the local networks, as many as were available, were definitely part of that initial kind of network consideration. And we have had 2 to 3 meetings with the area municipalities to talk about this approach. Frank, correct me if I'm wrong. My sense from those conversations was that they were quite supportive of the county taking more of a county road focus, but providing the support for local municipalities to pursue their local connections. Was that in line with what you heard from those meetings that we had, Frank?
Yeah, that's correct. No, they were supportive of our approach.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be giving this to the municipalities. We've already shared some of the initial documentation, so they very much are part of that process. And the one thing I will say about that sort of interplay is that we know that local roads can be quieter, can be more conducive to that cycling travel. And this by no means is meant to prevent cyclists from using those routes or municipalities from improving for those routes. It's meant to acknowledge that the county does have roads where there are cyclists, where there could be cyclists, and where improvements really could be made to enhance that, to complement what the local municipalities are doing.
Absolutely. So if you do have a question, absolutely, you can put your hand up. Eugene, I'll allow you to talk here, and then you can unmute. You gotta there you go, Eugene.
I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, I guess on behalf of myself and also the Oxford County Cycling Advisory Committee. Obviously very comprehensive and complete. I guess I'm excited when I see the one slide where it showed how many partners you might be able to tap over, not you, but whoever is involved in the trail development, tap over the next few years and get some resources to do the work. One thing, though, I think is necessary to be somewhat front and center is the fact that there's a lot of people, whether they're paid or volunteers or outsiders or resources, that need to get together. And if you want to call them advocates or champions or whatever, and they need to make sure that they're all talking the same language. And I started in this with Justin, but I'm not very good with the keyboard. And in the sense that if we start using words like awareness, and we start using words like promotion and maintenance and education and all those kinds of things, when you're getting people that come from different walks of life, different sectors, the vastness or the completion of each of those terms could be different. So you've got 5 people in the room who think awareness is one thing, but it's probably awareness and education they're thinking about or whatever. Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily a big thing for your plan. I think it's probably something we need to think about after, everything is in. We got to make sure that any communication strategy or anything like that takes into account that everybody's coming to the table with a different bag of tools. So that's all I wanted to say. So but thank you on behalf of the committee.
Oh, sorry, that was a really great point. And that's one of the reasons why we previously had Justin on board as a sub-consultant and then convinced him to come join us. But through that work, the Oxford County as an information hub and as a resource kind of came to the forefront because of that consistency, but also the opportunity to bring those different individuals or groups together so that there is a central source of information that is created in partnership, but then also promoted in partnership. And I couldn't agree with you more. I even sometimes wrap myself on the knuckles when I say my jargony language, and that is something I'm trying to work on. But we know that they can sometimes be a barrier for some people. So great comment. Really, this plan can be an opportunity to provide some guidance on what that could look like, to at least give you some direction. Obviously, that plan, like you said, would need to be developed together following this plan, but we can definitely build in some of the foundations to help with it. Was there anything else? I thought I might have seen one other hand up, but I could be wrong. Probably wrong. Wow. Are we in the nick of we are 2 minutes over, so I apologize. Thank you for those who have stayed with us. Really appreciate it. And if you do, as Justin has said previously, have any questions, comments, ideas, thoughts, a copy of this presentation will be on the project website, which is on the county's website, obviously. And maybe we can just put a link in the chat, Justin, if it's not too much trouble. If you'd like to reach out to myself or Jeff or anyone else, please feel free to do so. We look forward to hearing more from you, hopefully. No suggestion is a bad suggestion. No question is a bad question. We want to make sure that as we work towards the development and finalization of the master plan, that we capture as many of the thoughts, ideas, and comments that we can. So maybe one last time from myself and my WSP colleagues, thank you so much for joining us here tonight, and really excited by the participation. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, Claire, you wanted me to put the link to the Speak Up Oxford page in the chat?
Yes, please. That would be great.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
I'll put that in right now.
So I'm not sure if we're still live yet. If we're still live.
We're live until I turn this off.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm not sure if anybody else wanted to add anything from others, but Justin has put in the link to our project page. And thank you so much, everyone, once again. Have a great evening, I should say. It's Friday tomorrow. Enjoy yourselves.
Yeah, take care, everyone. Have a great
Take care.
Have a great